The hum of the airplane cabin was drowned out by the excited chatter of passengers settling into their seats. For many, this was just another flight, another journey from one destination to the next. But for 12-year-old Jaden Williams, this was supposed to be the start of something special, a trip he had been dreaming of for months. His mother had worked extra shifts to make it happen, and Jaden had spent countless evenings researching the sights he wanted to see, eagerly counting down the days until takeoff. Jaden, a bright-eyed boy with an infectious smile, clutched his small backpack tightly as he stepped onto the plane. Inside were his treasured items, a sketchbook he never left home without, a favorite book, and a new camera he'd saved up for, hoping to capture memories from this adventure. He greeted the flight attendants politely, his youthful excitement apparent in the way he peeked curiously into the cockpit as they passed by. But not everyone shared his enthusiasm. One of the flight attendants, a stern-faced woman named Miss Parker, barely acknowledged Jaden's greeting. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary, her expression unreadable. As Jaden made his way down the aisle, her gaze followed him, her lips pressed into a thin line. Jaden found his seat near the window, next to an older couple who smiled warmly at him. He had barely buckled his seatbelt when Miss Parker appeared in the aisle, her posture rigid, her voice clipped as she addressed him. "Excuse me, young man," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I need you to step off the plane immediately." The cabin fell silent. Passengers exchanged confused glances, whispers spreading like wildfire. Jaden's heart sank, his mind racing to understand what he could have done wrong. "But why?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I didn't do anything." Miss Parker crossed her arms, her gaze cold and unyielding. "I don't have to explain myself to you," she snapped. "You need to leave now." Tears welled up in Jaden's eyes as he looked around for help, but no one spoke up. Even the kind older couple beside him looked away, their discomfort evident. Jaden stood slowly, his legs shaking as he gathered his belongings. As he made his way back down the aisle, the weight of every passenger's stare felt unbearable. Some looked on with pity, others with indifference, and a few with silent approval. By the time Jaden reached the jet bridge, his mother was already there, her face a mix of confusion and anger. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice echoing in the empty terminal. Miss Parker stood firm, offering no explanation beyond vague mentions of safety concerns. Jaden clung to his mother's side, feeling small and humiliated. But what no one on that plane knew, what Miss Parker herself could never have anticipated, was that this was far from the end of the story. Jaden may have been just a boy, but he wasn't about to let this moment define him. What happened next would leave everyone speechless, and Miss Parker would soon learn that her actions had consequences far beyond what she could imagine. 7 minutes. That's all it took for the tables to turn. And when they did, no one, least of all Miss Parker, was ready for what was coming next. This introduction sets the stage for suspense and intrigue, leaving viewers eager to find out how Jaden takes control of the narrative and what kind of unexpected revenge awaits. Let me know if you'd like to refine or expand further. Jaden sat on a stiff chair in the terminal, his knees pulled up to his chest, clutching his backpack like it was a shield. His mother paced in front of him, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Every few seconds, she would stop, take a deep breath, and glance at her son, her frustration barely contained. "I don't understand," she muttered, her voice tight with anger. What kind of safety concern could they possibly have with a child? "You've done nothing wrong, Jaden." "Nothing." Jaden didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat felt like it was closing up, and every time he tried to speak, the words seemed stuck behind a lump of frustration and embarrassment. The stares, the whispers, the way Miss Parker had looked at him like he didn't belong. It all played on a loop in his mind. A customer service agent from the airline approached hesitantly, holding a clipboard, and wearing an awkward smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Williams?" she asked, her tone overly polite. "I'd like to discuss the situation and see if we can come to a resolution." Jaden's mother turned on her heel, her hands on her hips. "Oh, now you want to discuss it. My son was just publicly humiliated and kicked off a plane without any explanation. I'm not interested in a resolution until someone tells me why this happened in the first place." The agent flinched slightly but held her ground. "I completely understand your frustration, ma'am, and I'm here to help. However, I can only provide limited information due to company policy." The flight attendant reported that there was a potential issue with seating arrangements and safety compliance. "Safety compliance?" Jaden's mother interrupted, her voice rising. "Are you kidding me? My son was sitting in his assigned seat with his seatbelt on. How is that a safety issue?" Jaden's cheeks burned as a few other passengers nearby turned to look at the commotion. He hated being the center of attention like this, but he was also angry. Angry that no one had stood up for him on the plane. Angry that Miss Parker had treated him like he didn't matter. And angry that the airline seemed to be dodging the truth. The agent looked uncomfortable, shuffling her clipboard, as if hoping it might shield her from the storm brewing in Jaden's mother's glare. "I'll speak with the crew and gather more details," she said quickly. "In the meantime, we'd like to offer you and your son a voucher for a future flight." "No," Jaden's mother snapped. "What we want is an answer. And if you can't give me one, I'll find someone who can." With that, she turned away from the agent and knelt down beside Jaden, her expression softening. "Are you okay, baby?" she asked, brushing a curl away from his forehead. Jaden nodded hesitantly. "Yeah, I'm just confused." "Why did she do that, Mom?" "I didn't do anything." "I know you didn't, sweetheart," his mother said, her voice cracking slightly. "But I promise you, we're not letting this go." As they sat there, the minutes dragged on, and Jaden's mind started to wander. He thought about the trip they had planned, the landmarks he had been so excited to see, and the photos he had dreamed of taking. The excitement that had filled him just hours ago now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a heavy sadness that weighed him down. And yet, beneath that sadness, something else began to stir, something he couldn't quite put into words. It was a mix of determination and defiance, a quiet voice inside him that refused to let this moment define him. Nearby, a family that had been on the same flight walked past, their voices low, but their words unmistakable. It was so strange. The mother whispered to her husband, "That poor boy looked terrified. I wonder if there was some kind of misunderstanding." Jaden overheard them and felt a flicker of hope. Maybe not everyone believed Miss Parker's version of events. Maybe there were people who saw what had happened and knew it wasn't right. His mother was now on her phone, her voice firm as she spoke to someone. Maybe a friend, maybe a lawyer. Jaden couldn't tell. He just stared out the window at the runway, watching the planes take off and disappear into the sky, wondering if he'd ever get to board one again without feeling this knot of anxiety in his chest. Back on the plane, Miss Parker was busy attending to the remaining passengers, her demeanor as brisk and no-nonsense as ever. But something about her movements seemed different, more hurried, less confident. A few passengers had asked her quiet questions about the incident, and though she had deflected them with vague answers, she could feel the tension in the air. In her mind, she replayed the moments leading up to the confrontation with Jaden. She told herself she had done the right thing, that she had acted in the interest of safety and protocol. But a small voice at the back of her mind whispered doubts. Doubts she quickly shoved aside. She didn't have time for second-guessing. What she didn't know was that Jaden's mother had already started posting about the incident on social media. Her phone buzzed non-stop, with notifications as friends, family, and strangers began to share the story, expressing outrage and demanding answers. Within minutes, the post had gained traction, and comments flooded in. Some people offered support and sympathy, while others shared their own stories of feeling mistreated or judged unfairly. It was clear that this wasn't just about one boy on one flight. This was about something bigger, something that resonated deeply with people who had faced similar experiences. Jaden's mother showed him the post, her eyes blazing with determination. "You see this, Jaden? People are listening. They know what happened to you wasn't right." Jaden looked at the screen, his heart pounding. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as powerless as he had felt on that plane. But as the story spread, so did the questions. Who was Miss Parker, and why had she acted the way she did? What had truly happened in those moments before Jaden was escorted off the plane? And most importantly, what would happen next? The answers were still unclear, but one thing was certain: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Would you like me to continue with the story or refine any part of it? Let me know. Jaden sat quietly in the airport terminal, his fingers tracing invisible lines on his jeans. His mom was still on the phone, now speaking more urgently to someone who seemed to be asking a lot of questions. The steady stream of buzzes and dings from her phone suggested that the online post had taken on a life of its own. Jaden glanced at the screen again, trying to wrap his head around how quickly everything was spreading. Hundreds of comments had flooded in, some from people sharing words of encouragement, others venting their frustration about similar experiences. It was overwhelming. Across the terminal, a few passengers who had been on the flight lingered near the windows, pretending to watch planes while stealing glances at Jaden and his mom. One man finally mustered the courage to approach them. He was tall and dressed in business attire, with a kind but nervous expression. "Excuse me," the man said softly, looking between Jaden and his mom. "I just wanted to say, I was on the flight. I saw what happened." Jaden's mom paused her call, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And," she asked, a tone cautious, The man hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "I thought it was wrong, the way that flight attendant treated your son. She didn't give him a chance to explain or anything. It was uncomfortable to watch." Jaden's mom nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "So why didn't you say anything?" she asked, her voice sharp, but not unkind. The man sighed, guilt clouding his features. "I don't know. I guess I didn't want to cause a scene. But I felt bad about it. And now that I see what you're dealing with, well, if there's anything I can do, just let me know." Jaden's mom studied him for a moment before offering a small nod. "Thank you for saying that. Honestly, it means something that you came over." The man nodded, visibly relieved, and handed her a business card. "If you need a witness or someone to confirm what happened, I'm happy to help." As he walked away, Jaden's mom stared at the card for a moment before slipping it into her purse. Jaden watched her closely, noticing how her shoulders seemed a little less tense now. "See, Jaden," she said, her voice softer. "People are paying attention. They know this wasn't right." Jaden nodded, though he still didn't feel entirely reassured. There was a part of him that just wanted to forget the whole thing, to get back to the excitement he felt before stepping onto that plane. But another part of him, a quieter, stronger part, knew they couldn't let this go. Meanwhile, on the plane, Miss Parker was beginning to feel the weight of her decision. She moved up and down the aisle with practiced efficiency, but her usual confidence had wavered. She could feel the eyes of certain passengers lingering on her, could hear the occasional murmurs as people whispered about what had happened. At first, she tried to brush it off. She had followed protocol, she told herself. She had acted in the best interest of the flight. But deep down, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, she had overreacted. Toward the back of the plane, a young woman with curly hair and a tablet in her lap was typing furiously. Her name was Sophie, and she was a freelance journalist who had boarded the flight intending to write about her travels. But after witnessing the incident with Jaden, she knew she had stumbled upon a much bigger story. Sophie had seen the way Miss Parker looked at Jaden, the way she dismissed his polite questions, and refused to explain her actions. To Sophie, it felt personal, even if Miss Parker insisted it wasn't. And now, as she typed out her thoughts, Sophie wondered how many other kids like Jaden had faced similar situations. How many families had been silenced or dismissed because no one wanted to rock the boat. She glanced up as Miss Parker walked past her row, her expression blank, but her movements stiff. Sophie made a quick note about the flight attendant's demeanor, then looked back at her screen. She knew she had to tread carefully with this story. She didn't want to jump to conclusions or sensationalize the situation. But she also felt a responsibility to shine a light on what she had seen. Back in the terminal, Jaden and his mom were approached by another airline employee, this one wearing a blazer and a name tag that identified him as a manager. He introduced himself as Mr. Daniels and offered an apologetic smile. Jaden's mom crossed her arms, a skepticism evident. Taking it seriously, is that why no one can tell me why my son was kicked off the plane in the first place? Mr. Daniels hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. I understand your frustration, ma'am, and I want to assure you that our priority is the safety and comfort of all our passengers. However, I believe there may have been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Jaden's mom echoed, her voice rising. You think it's a misunderstanding to humiliate a 12-year-old boy in front of an entire plane? To accuse him of being a safety risk without any explanation? Jaden's mom's words drew the attention of more people in the terminal. Passengers who had been quietly scrolling through their phones now looked up, some nodding in agreement as they overheard the conversation. Mr. Daniels cleared his throat, his discomfort growing. I understand how upsetting this must be, and we're committed to making it right. I'd like to arrange a private meeting with you to discuss the situation further. Jaden's mom shook her head. No, we're not doing this behind closed doors. My son was humiliated in public, and this airline needs to take accountability in public. The tension in the air was palpable. Jaden looked around, noticing how more and more people seemed to be paying attention, their phones out, recording or snapping photos. For the first time, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected. Hope. Maybe they weren't alone in this after all. But even as the pressure mounted on the airline to address what had happened, there were still so many unanswered questions. Why had Miss Parker acted the way she did? Was there more to the story than anyone realized? And how far would Jaden and his mom have to go to make sure their voices were heard? As the minutes ticked by, Jaden felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He didn't know how this would end, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just about him anymore. Let me know if you'd like to keep the story going. Jaden sat silently as the crowd around them grew. What had started as a few curious glances had now turned into a gathering of people whispering, recording, and even approaching his mother to offer their support. It was strange, comforting, yet overwhelming. Jaden was used to being noticed for his smile, his quick sketches, or the stories he'd tell in class, not for something like this. His mom had stopped pacing now and stood firm, her phone in hand, still recording everything that unfolded. She wasn't about to let anyone twist the narrative. Mr. Daniels was clearly uneasy, his polished manager demeanor slipping as the weight of the situation pressed harder. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as if looking for someone to save him from the brewing storm. Ma'am, we're taking steps to investigate this thoroughly, he said again, but his words were losing conviction. Please, let's move to a quieter area where we can address your concerns privately. No, Jaden's mom said firmly. We're not hiding this. I've been polite. I've given you plenty of chances to explain why my son was treated this way. Now, I'm done playing nice. The determination in her voice sent a ripple through the onlookers. People murmured in agreement, their collective energy starting to shift. Jaden could feel it too, a simmering frustration that seemed to pull strangers together. At the same time, Sophie, the journalist from the plane, had joined the growing crowd. She had been quietly observing, her tablet in hand, noting every detail. As she stepped forward, Her voice cut through the tension like a sharp blade. "Excuse me, Mr. Daniels," she said, her tone calm but commanding. "I'm a journalist, and I was on that flight. I witnessed what happened to Jaden." The crowd hushed slightly as all eyes turned to her. Mr. Daniels stiffened, his expression a mix of surprise and wariness. "We'd all like to know," Sophie continued, "what exactly made a 12-year-old boy a safety concern. Because from where I was sitting, it didn't look like he did anything wrong." Jaden felt a spark of hope flicker in his chest. Finally, someone was standing up for him, someone who seemed to have the power to make people listen. Mr. Daniels hesitated, his polished exterior cracking further. "As I've said, we're investigating the matter. It's important to gather all the facts before making any conclusions." Sophie tilted her head, unconvinced. "Gathering facts. That's interesting, as I've seen situations like this before. It's not uncommon for airlines to make hasty decisions and then hide behind vague policies when they're questioned." Her words hit hard, and Jaden could see the shift in the crowd. People were no longer just curious. They were angry. Parents in the crowd exchanged knowing looks, imagining their own children in Jaden's place. Meanwhile, inside the plane, Miss Parker was growing increasingly uneasy. She had thought the situation would blow over quickly, that Jaden and his mother would take the voucher and move on. But as she looked out the small window near the galley and saw the commotion in the terminal, her stomach tightened. The pilot, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, approached her quietly. "What's going on out there?" he asked, nodding toward the terminal. Miss Parker shrugged, though her posture was stiff. "Just a misunderstanding," she said, trying to sound casual. "I followed protocol." The pilot frowned slightly, studying her. "You're sure about that? Because it looks like that misunderstanding is turning into a media storm." Miss Parker didn't respond. Instead, she turned and busied herself with checking supplies, her hands shaking slightly as she rearranged napkins that didn't need rearranging. Back in the terminal, the tension was reaching a boiling point. Jaden's mom, Sophie, and the crowd of onlookers were pressing harder, their collective demand for answers growing louder. Even employees at nearby gates had paused their work to watch the drama unfold. Suddenly, a woman in a crisp suit walked briskly toward the group. She had an air of authority about her, a name tag identifying her as Miss Carter, Regional Operations Manager. Her expression was stern but composed, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. "I'm Miss Carter," she announced, her voice cutting through the noise. "I've been informed about the situation, and I'd like to speak with Ms. Williams and her son privately." Jaden's mom didn't budge. "We're not going anywhere," she said firmly. "If you have something to say, you can say it right here." Miss Carter's gaze hardened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she straightened her blazer and took a deep breath. "We are deeply sorry for any distress caused to you and your son," she began, her tone measured. "The decision to remove him from the flight was made based on information provided by the flight crew. However, we are conducting an internal review to ensure that proper procedures were followed." "An internal review," Sophie interjected, her voice cutting through Ms. Carter's polished speech. "That sounds like corporate speak, for we don't want to take responsibility." A few people in the crowd chuckled softly, but Jaden's mom remained focused. "My son was kicked off a plane for no reason," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "He was humiliated in front of strangers, and now you're telling me you don't even know why. That's not an apology. That's an excuse." The tension in the air was thick, and for a moment no one spoke. Then a voice from the crowd broke the silence. Miss Parker should explain herself. Heads turned toward the voice, a woman who had been sitting near the gate, her arms crossed tightly. "I was on the flight," she continued, stepping forward. "That boy didn't do anything wrong. And you all saw how that flight attendant acted, like he didn't even deserve to be there." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Jaden felt his heart pounding. For the first time, It felt like the tide was turning in his favor. But even as the momentum built, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was about to happen. Miss Carter, now visibly uncomfortable, glanced back toward the gate, as if looking for an escape. "We take these matters very seriously," she said again, her voice faltering slightly. "Please know that we are committed to addressing this situation appropriately." But it wasn't enough. The crowd wasn't backing down, and neither was Jaden's mom. "What's appropriate," she said, her voice rising, "is admitting that my son was targeted unfairly and holding the people responsible accountable." The energy in the room was electric, the tension so thick it felt like something was about to snap. And somewhere in the chaos, Jaden realized something important. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about standing up for what was right, no matter how hard it was. As the crowd pushed for answers, and as the airline scrambled to control the growing storm, Jaden felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. The truth was coming, one way or another, and when it did, there would be no going back. "Let me know if you'd like to continue." The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, blending into an almost deafening hum, as Miss Carter stood frozen under the weight of the confrontation. Jaden watched her carefully, his hands gripping the edges of his chair. He didn't know what she could possibly say to fix what had already happened, but he could tell she was struggling to hold on to control. And then something unexpected happened. Before Sophie could open the email, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. Asterisk, asterisk. "Be careful who you trust." Asterisk, asterisk. A chill ran through Jaden as he looked at the messages. His mom frowned, and protective instincts kicking in. "What does that mean?" she asked. Sophie shook her head, her expression troubled. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I think there's more going on here than we realize." Jaden felt a shiver of unease as the weight of the moment settled over him. The immediate conflict might have been resolved, but something about Sophie's reaction told him the story was far from over. Sophie stared at the phone in her hands, the unsettling messages lingering in her mind. "What the heck is this all about?" she muttered almost to herself. Her fingers hovered over the screen, but she didn't seem eager to open the email. Jaden, still standing beside her, glanced nervously at his mom. Something felt off. His mom could tell he was on edge too, and her protective instincts flared up once more. "Should we just ignore it?" Jaden asked softly, though the unease in his voice was undeniable. Sophie shook her head slowly. "No, I don't think so. This could be important." Her voice was tinged with uncertainty, and for a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. The situation with Miss Parker, the flight attendant, had taken an unexpected turn. But now this new twist, this mysterious warning, made Jaden feel like the story wasn't finished yet. Jaden's mom crossed her arms, her gaze never leaving Sophie. "If there's something else going on, we deserve to know. This doesn't sit right with me. We can't just move on like this." Sophie nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration, as she swiped open the email. Her eyes scanned the words, her face growing more tense with each sentence. "It's from someone claiming to be a former employee," she said, her voice tight. "They're saying that Miss Parker isn't the only person involved in this behavior, and there's a bigger cover-up within the airline." Jaden's stomach twisted as his mom took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. "Cover up? What's that supposed to mean?" Sophie read aloud from the email. "There's a pattern of discrimination that the airline has ignored for years. Miss Parker was just a small piece of the puzzle, and now they're trying to sweep everything under the rug. The truth needs to come out." The weight of the words sank in like a stone. Jaden could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing up, a sense of foreboding creeping over him. The resolution they thought they had was slowly crumbling, replaced by something darker. Jaden's mom took a deep breath. "We need to do something with this information. This isn't just about us anymore." Sophie's phone buzzed again, and another message appeared. "There's someone you need to talk to," the text said. "Meet me at the airport tomorrow after hours." I'll tell you everything." There was no name, no identifying information, just a location and a cryptic message. Sophie hesitated, then turned to Jaden and his mom. "What do you think? Should we go?" Jaden's mom didn't waste any time. "We're going. This doesn't end until we get all the answers." The next evening, they returned to the airport, the empty halls and quiet surroundings making everything feel surreal. It was eerily calm, like the calm before a storm. Sophie, Jaden, and his mom made their way toward the designated spot, an isolated corner near the baggage claim. They waited in silence, the minutes ticking by slowly. Finally, a figure approached from the shadows. A tall, well-dressed man with a stern expression walked toward them. His eyes locked onto Sophie as he stepped closer, then he glanced at Jaden and his mom. "I'm James," he said in a low voice. "I worked with Miss Parker for years. She's not the only one. There are others like her, but they've been protected by the system. The airline is trying to bury the truth." Jaden felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean? What's really going on?" James lowered his voice even further, glancing around cautiously before continuing. "I'm not just talking about discrimination. I'm talking about intentional sabotage, flight schedules, maintenance issues. I know it sounds crazy, but they've been pushing these things to make certain flights more dangerous, hoping people would get scared and stop flying." Jaden's mom's eyes widened. "Are you serious? You're saying they've been deliberately putting people at risk?" James nodded grimly. "It wasn't all the time, but enough to keep people in check. Enough to make them too scared to question things." The revelation hung heavy in the air. Jaden's mind raced as he tried to process what James was saying. The idea that a corporation could intentionally endanger its passengers for some kind of gain seemed unbelievable, but James's serious demeanor made it hard to dismiss. "We tried to bring it to light," James continued, "but anyone who spoke up was either silenced or let go. Miss Parker, she was just the tip of the iceberg, but the people behind all this, they're protected by power and money. And now, they'll do whatever they can to keep this hidden." Jaden's mom clenched her fists. "This is bigger than we thought. We can't let them get away with it." James took a deep breath. "I'm not here to tell you what to do. But I'm telling you, if you want to expose the truth, you'll have to go public. The media won't just let this slide, and the more people know, the harder it will be for them to cover it up. But you have to be ready for the backlash. They'll stop at nothing to protect their secrets." Jaden's heart raced. This wasn't just about the incident on the plane anymore. It was about something much larger, something more sinister. The stakes had never been higher. After a long pause, Jaden's mom spoke with resolve. "We're not backing down. This ends now." Over the next few days, the story exploded. News outlets picked up on the airline's cover-up, and the public reaction was swift and overwhelming. Interviews, investigations, and even more whistleblowers came forward, each piece of evidence painting a clearer picture of systemic corruption within the airline. The company tried to fight back, but the damage was done. As public outcry grew louder, the airline's leadership was forced to resign, and new policies were put in place to ensure accountability. Miss Parker was exposed for what she truly was, just one part of a much larger scheme. For Jaden, the battle had been hard fought, but in the end, he found justice. His name, once tainted by the false accusations, was now synonymous with truth and integrity. And as the dust settled, he realized something profound. This fight was never just about one person or one incident. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the odds. As Jaden and his mom stood together, watching the news coverage unfold, they couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. They had fought not only for their dignity, but for the truth to be known. They had faced powerful forces and come out on top. But most importantly, they had made sure that their voices were heard, and that no one would ever again be treated the way Jaden had been on that fateful flight. In the end, it wasn't just about one boy's revenge. It was about justice, courage, and the power of standing up for what's right. And that, Jaden realized, was the most powerful lesson of all.